And away we go, because you're in reality and you're on the reality show from the Ayn Rand Center UK, and we're delighted you're with us. We've got a motley crew of cast of characters. Actually, they're anything but motley. They're very rational, and they're here for your enjoyment, and they're here for your education, and we're all students of objectivism here on the Ayn Rand Center UK. We've got Kirk Wilcox, podcaster, influencer, and so much more. Morgan Carter is here. Morgan, delighted you're with us. John Waz, the art fiend, is here. The artist, the wonderful artist. Thank you, John, for being with us. And Linda Cordair, the wonderful, also from the art world, with her galleries and so much more. Linda, thank you for being with us today. And we've got so much to get into. So let's start right off with what really shocked me. Was one of those headlines that you thought, boy, I'm not sure if this is from the Onion or not. The governor of New Mexico has issued a gun ban in Albuquerque through a public health order. When questioned whether this was a violation of Second Amendment rights, the governor answered that she didn't think this was she didn't believe that any constitutional rights were absolute. So kind of shocking in a number of ways. And let's maybe start it off with Morgan. What surprises you most about this? And even more interestingly, where do you think your knowledge of objectivism weaves into your understanding of the issue?
Well, I guess my first question I'd have for the governor is whether she really believes that, or whether she just said it. Because does she really believe that the founding fathers of America didn't intend for these to be absolutely held rights? Like, there's something really, because what she said was not just that they aren't absolute. She said, I don't think they're intended to be absolute. And that's an even stranger way of putting it, really, if you think about it.
Isn't that what a right is? It's something that no one else can take away? Isn't that the whole idea of a right, as I understand it?
Well, exactly, yeah. And I think there's an awful sense, particularly with objectivism. Rand's got a fantastic ability to kind of detect the premises that people are relying on. And if you listen to the video where she's talking about it, I think you get an awful sense of this having been the premises she's acting on having been set a long time ago. Because when the kind of journalist kind of pushes back at her, kind of trying to argue that they are absolute, she says, look, there are restrictions on freedom of speech. There are restrictions on all these other constitutional rights. So why not this one? And as much as that's a really terrible thing to say, there's a certain logic to it, because once you violated one of them, then all the others are violated on principle as well. So it's a really appalling thing that I think that she's done. It's not just a mistake that she's made and she's then kind of, realized, oh, I've done something wrong, I'm going to correct it. She's kind of, I don't know, it's too appalling for words almost. It's terrible.
And there's two elements, right? I mean, there's the constitutional part of it. And Linda, I'll go to you next, if you don't mind. There's this whole idea of public health. She's going to get rid of guns. Why? Well, in the name of public health. So that to me always kind of rings a little bit of a public good, public health. What exactly is that? Maybe you know.
She's not going to get rid of guns. She's just going to make it to where people are going to get them anyway, right? She's not going to take away my constitutional rights. I'm not moving there. However, she did swear an oath when she took office. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution and laws of the state of New Mexico, and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, so I'm sorry if you didn't think that was an absolute, but you swore to it. And I think you opened your mouth maybe when you shouldn't have.
I have to just jump in quickly. I mean, Linda, you mentioned something. I brought in a quote from Rand from the Ford Hall Forum that you basically echoed. Ayn Rand was asked in 1971 at the Ford Hall Forum about guns. She said, forbidding guns or registering them is not going to stop criminals from having them, nor is it a great threat to the public, non-criminal citizen, if he has to register the fact that he has a gun. So, I mean, she spoke on this, but to your point, she said, look, even if you register them, if you make them illegal, it's not going to stop the criminals from getting them. John,
in fact, it might make it more of a challenge. Tell the toddler not to touch the hot stove, and what are they going to do? They're going to touch it to see if it's hot. Tell someone you can't have a gun. This country wasn't built on telling people they can't do things.
John, what say you?
Well, I think she also mentioned that her oath is not absolute in her comment. She said specifically, no constitutional right, in my view, including my oath, is intended to be absolute. And she cited restrictions on free speech, an example of how rights can be curtailed in emergency situations. And that's the key right there, in my opinion. I think the government is going all out on this idea of emergencies because they got away with so much during COVID.
She's as much as said, I don't have to do what I promised. And
it's an emergency, so anything goes. The left, even the right, libertarians, all of them are trying to turn our life into a big emergency so that they can get away with whatever they think is best, or whatever they can force on the rest, whatever they think is best. I mean, apparently this is her order is in response to a shooting of 3 children. That's all I know about the shooting. I don't know where it happened or anything. But if you're going to say a shooting in a city is an emergency, then, well, the whole country needs to be locked down, and let's just declare martial law right now and get this over with, because you obviously think you know what's best for the rest of us. But it's just from the standpoint of a politician, yes, your oath to the Constitution is absolute. You are not above the law. That's what she is saying in this act, is that she is above the Constitution. And I'm hoping the courts or whoever save them from her, and maybe they can push her out, because she should be. I'm actually with Musk on this one, because he said a risk of stating what should be obvious, deliberately violating the Constitution is next level illegal. How soon can this person be removed from office? And I agree with him.
amen.
James Valiant, thanks for your contribution. James says, quoting, "Congress shall make no law," sounds absolute to me. And thank you, Nick Bruno, for your generous contribution. Kirk, this whole thing, quickly getting back to the idea of like, well, what's in the public good? It's such a kind of a deceptive switcheroo, because if you can get everyone to say, oh yeah, this is in the public good, then you say, oh, well, why shouldn't government force you to do it? Right? If it's in the public good, yeah, government should just force everyone to do what they know is in the so. And of course, there's no individual mentioned at all.
Yeah, and when you watch the press conference that the governor of New Mexico did, she was really pitting one group against another. She's like, yeah, you technically have your right to carry, but like, what about other people's right to safety, as a means to try to justify her shenanigans? One thing I find interesting is some other high-level Democrats, including Representative Ted Lieu, got a lot of, and I think he deserves credit for this, calling it out on Twitter, saying, I support gun safety laws. However, this act on the governor of New Mexico violates the Constitution. Even gun activist David Hogg was pushing back against this. But at the same time, I think we need to really talk about the leadership within the Democratic Party, which the governor of New Mexico is a member of. Back in April of 2021, this from the White House's website, they put out a statement. President Biden on gun violence prevention. President Biden said in 2021, no amendment to the Constitution is absolute. You can't yell crowd. You can't, I think he jumbled the quote because I'm trying to read it verbatim. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater and call it freedom of speech from the very beginning. You cannot own any weapon you wanted to own. And then aside from that, this is a president who's been trying to govern by executive order, which the governor of New Mexico is trying to do. And I remember one of those orders was trying to issue an eviction moratorium through the CDC. And at the time, President Biden said, whether that option will pass constitutional measure with this administration, I cannot tell you. I don't know. There are a few scholars who will say it will, others who will say it's not likely to, but at minimum, by the time it gets litigated, it will probably give some additional time while we're getting that $45 billion out to people, this and that. So I wonder if this is just a combination of and then you also have to consider the fact that the current vice president, Kamala Harris, when she was running for president in 2019, she said on Twitter that if Congress will not act to pass gun legislation, then I will. And she was rewarded with a VP slot a year later for that. So I wonder how much of this is just people like Governor Grisham of New Mexico taking cues from her party leadership, like, yeah, no amendment is absolute. And yeah, it's totally fine to troubleshoot the Constitution by trying to govern by executive order, just sign executive orders and then see if it's constitutional later, I guess.
And she gets the moral high ground, right? Because even if this doesn't pass, even if it is struck as constitutional, she gets to wear that badge of, I'm acting in the public interest. All of you are just selfish. You're just worried about your gun rights. Oh, who cares about that? I am acting for the children, right? I'm sure we heard about that a number of times. So it's just, Rand always talks about, coming back to individual versus collectivism. And it just, the whole thing reeks of collectivism to me. Public interest, greater good, down to the very heart.
Yeah, don't be selfish. Act in the public interest.
Well, that's what Newsom said he was doing during COVID. And now all of a sudden he's recanting and he's saying, I would have done it differently had I known. No, you wouldn't have. This is all about him getting into the White House, which is a whole nother discussion to have. But, these politicians saying what they think everyone wants to hear, that's nothing new.
And would this, I think, John, you made this mention, mentioned this point. Would this have even been attempted if not for what happened during COVID? Or is this giving politicians kind of a new license to basically try anything and F the Constitution?
Yeah, I agree. Emergency is the new key word here, I think.
Well, that's straight out of Alice, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh,
make the whole world a hospital, and anything goes.
The whole reason that we won our challenge with the state of California is because they were violating our and many other people's constitutional rights. We went and took the Constitution and said, here, you need to read this. You may have sworn to a public office, but you obviously don't know what you're doing. And now all of a sudden, 3 years later, I would have done it differently. So yeah, he could walk in here, offer to buy the whole place, and I'd tell him to leave.
Well, I have to say,
and as if no one back then was mentioning he should be doing it differently and warning him about everything, so. Oh, I just didn't know.
I mean, I guess my only thought would be, who can make the moral argument here? Who in Albuquerque or who in New Mexico can make the moral argument? Because, she's making a practical argument, right? She's saying, look, kids are getting killed. We all care about kids. Guns are the thing that are doing the killing. I'm the good guy here. So who can make the moral argument and to affect some change, in this situation and writ large? I don't know. We'll see if it can be done. We'll go around the horn one more time. Morgan, what say you?
I don't know who can affect change. I mean, I really wish I was more of an optimist in life. I know a lot of objectivists who really want to be optimistic. I'm a bit of a bummer, I'm afraid, and I wish I weren't. The thing that I have to say that also struck me about this is there's a deep, I think, subjectivism about what she was saying. When we were just talking about the state of emergency, and if you listen to what she said, the guy says, aren't these absolutes? And she says, well, not if there's an emergency, and I've declared one. She didn't say there's these things going on which make it there's an emergency going on, so I've declared the state to match to those facts. She just said, I've declared one, therefore there is one, therefore I can do what I like. And there's a really troubling principle if we're no longer making laws on principle, the rule of law, if we're making law under the rule of men, of individual people's whims and wishes, like the governor of New Mexico, then we've got a really troubling future ahead of us. Hence, perhaps my doom and gloom.
Bonnie, who's a super chat member of ours, thank you, Bonnie. Bonnie says, the only way you can understand and validate individualism, including man's conceptual faculty, is to be able to think in terms of principles. They don't. And that says it pretty well. Anyone want to get onto this before we go on to the artistic world, which we've got a great representation here today? We'll kick it onto that. Interesting story out of Europe, I believe. An article published in the Art newspaper has claimed that the art world still favors the rich. How can we fix that? So, according to the art press, the art world is too much about the rich. That needs to be fixed. What do you make about that? What do you think about that? Is the art world only for the rich? Ayn Rand, I don't think, certainly didn't believe so. And what do you think about kind of some of the philosophy behind this idea that even if the art world was for the rich, we've got to do something about that. So the art world, I mean, I have to start obviously with John and Linda. And John, maybe you are an artist. Do you think the art world is only for the rich? You must be loaded then, I suppose, right? If you're an artist.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I have a lot to say about this one, and I don't even know where to start. But no, the art world is not only for the rich. It historically, yes, it has been, but it's a slow change away from that as technology grows and the techniques in art become more mainstream and stuff. So I just, right away, the article starts out, though, I think this is funny, with the statement that in December 2022, data from the Office of National Statistics revealed that the proportion of working class creatives in the UK shrank by half between the 70s and 2010. But despite this, an emerging generation of artists, curators, and gallerists, all without silver spoons in their mouths, is taking the British art scene by storm. So what's the problem? It's that it's not happening fast enough. Like all of the complainers on the left or the right, they all want society and culture to change now. You know, they have no understanding that everything is a pretty slow evolution, even morally. And so and this one person claims, so this is an article and there's several artists that they're interviewing about this. Well, artists and gallery owners and curators and stuff. But this one artist says, the game has completely changed. He says, if I were starting out now, I couldn't have afforded art school. The artist also points out that the stakeholders best positioned to reform the art world are the least inclined to do so. Those with extreme privilege are the ones who can make those changes. We're talking about power structures that exist within those ivory towers. He adds that the question of how to counter the socioeconomic imbalance that still dominates the sector should really be directed at them. Yeah, the art world game has changed. The internet is changing the game. These artists talk as if there is a divine right to success for their profession, and that the success is only about breaking into the established art market of millionaires and billionaires. But the art world is changing daily with the internet, with AI, with ability to sell online to anywhere around the world. People of all different socioeconomic levels. They can sell without becoming part of galleries or shops. They can pretty much learn any technique online that you want to practically for free. I have personally learned how to do things with glass blowing, painting, sculpting, repairing my lawnmower, all on YouTube for free. So this idea that art school or learning to create art is becoming harder because you can't get into art school is absolutely ridiculous. There are even sites now where you can just upload your work and the site sells and promotes your prints for you. You don't have to do anything, you just upload your work. So I don't get how these people are having such problems, at least making a little bit of money off their art. And I hate to break it to them, but becoming artists have always been a difficult field. Not that long ago, it wasn't even a possibility if you didn't have a patron or were born into that class. Now, several of these artists that they're actually interviewing have come from lower classes and are in the art market now. So the incidence of that happening is far more prominent. And then another galleryist complains that there's limited access to influential circles. And it has been a major hurdle in sustaining their gallery. Despite this, being a galleryist from a working class background has fueled my determination and passion for championing emerging artists. The dealer believes the art market itself raises questions about fairness and wealth distribution. Adding the act of owning and displaying art has been linked to showcasing social status and affluence, which challenges the perception that art is solely about aesthetic appreciation. The left doesn't believe that art is only about aesthetic appreciation. In fact, their main definition of art seems to be about social change. So when you've got that kind of philosophy going on, the regular person isn't as into that, but then a rich person might buy that because it gives them affluence and, hey, look at me, I support this new cause or whatever. It's what you get when you separate art from values. Only snobby rich people are going to buy this stuff because, it's a good tax write-off for one. I mean, look at Hunter Biden.
Right, John. Wait, John, I have to jump in for 1 second because it's like when I listen to what you're describing, what they're describing art as, and what Rand is, Rand describes. I'm kind of paraphrasing though. Like art is like a life-sustaining, necessity of life, a part of your passion and your soul. And Linda, when you hear that's the world you live in. Is this, so for you, I mean, art isn't just, it delves into that aesthetic passion.
It absolutely does. And I want to echo a lot of what John said. My biggest thing that I came away with from reading the article, and, after the steam stopped boiling out of my ears, like on a Saturday morning cartoon, is that this is a very collectivist approach to give me, give them, give us. And that's not how the art world works. If they spent more time creating beauty, to quote Ayn Rand, the stylized recreation of reality based on the artist's metaphysical value judgments. And I went in and looked at some of their art. No wonder you're having trouble. There's a lot of stuff being created out there that is not uplifting in nature, and ideally not something you should want to see every day if you can even identify what it is. So obviously we're very different on that market, but I have to completely disagree with this whole rich thing, or elitist, as one of them said. One of our youngest collectors isn't even 20 years old yet. And our oldest one is well into her 80s. And neither of those two people are rich. We go out of our way to try to make the art affordable because we know it's something that people need in their lives. And to have a group of people who were obviously prompted by a reporter, give us your woe story. Yeah, it's hard to make a living as an artist. John would be the first person to tell you that. Quent and I work very hard to put roofs over our artists' heads. Going back to an earlier conversation, that's why we did what we did during COVID and fought the government and said we'd go to the Supreme Court if we had to, because our artists are like family. But look behind me, look at what these artists are creating. Go to our website and see art that you're going to want to see every day. There's people out there who are paying millions of dollars. I remember emailing this guy. It was in one of the rags, it might have even been in Art News, that he paid $26 million for what was essentially looked like a piece of plywood. It appeared to be about 4 feet by 8 feet, and it was blue, and it had a white stripe down the middle of it. And someone told him that that was art and that was valuable. And if that reflected his values, more power to him. I sent him a note and said I would have done it for $250,000, could have saved him $25.5 million. Never heard back from him. But to go out there, and we are approached on a very regular basis by artists looking for representations. We're very empathetic to artists trying to make a living. Not everybody is creating art at this level. And yet the vast majority of our collection is collected by people who are not in that billionaire status. If they knew we existed, well, that's my job, right? So that's why we're in 2 very affluent tourist destinations, to hopefully help our artists find homes by putting the art in front of more people. But what I took from this article, again, very collectivist, do this for me, regardless of what it is I'm creating, regardless of whether or not it concretizes anybody's values. I'm creating this, therefore you should buy this for me. And that's not how it works. I don't go to the grocery and buy the green meat. I buy the good stuff.
Race Jacobson, who's also a YouTube subscriber of ours, we appreciate that. That really helps us keep our programming going. He asks, why focus on high ticket art when so much art is dirt cheap, like Waz is saying? Well, likely because it's high ticket, not because it's good art. I mean, and Kirk, isn't that such a thing? I always hear your own Brooke talk about this. Like, you can get a print on your wall. You can get a inexpensive sculpture that really, improves your quality of life or improves your room. So it's not like, oh, you've got to be a millionaire to have art. You can have art for 10 cents on your wall. Legitimate, benevolent art.
Look what Maxfield Parrish did, right? I mean, here he was creating these huge masterpieces, many of which are in museums. Some are still in private collections, and some are scattered all over San Francisco in big theaters like the Orpheum and in bars, I think in the Palace Hotel. But Daybreak was such a popular image that he made everything all the way down to posters. The image was in more American homes than any other work of art at that time. And it was very inexpensive. So art does not have to be expensive.
What do you think, Kirk?
Well, I do want to say I agree with something that John Was said earlier when he alluded to the fact that in a lot of ways, I think in significant ways, it's a lot easier to create today more than ever. Today might be a better time for artists and creators more than ever, especially with the internet, but especially if you look at the trends with computer hardware and software, even over the last 20 years, it's become much more affordable and easier to use, easier to learn things with tools like YouTube, where you can find a lot of free do-it-yourself tutorials in a variety of ways. But one thing this article alludes to, it talks about how I think the blame is misplaced. They try to like blame the rich as if, because they talk about like a lot of struggles, like high rents in places like London and high costs of living. And they act as if this is like some sort of benefit to the rich. I think that's a bad way to frame it. I would say it's what it sounds to me is like it's a unnecessary cost to people who are struggling. You see this a lot in Southern California, especially with the writer's strike and the actor strikes. Whenever you read about this, the people will say, oh, we're striking because we need higher wages because rent is unaffordable in LA, cost of living is so high in California. And it's like, yeah, a lot of that is true, but it's not because like the rich are over there trying to scheme to like benefit the acting world or the writer world or the art world to their benefit. It's like, no, there's just a lot of bad economic policies that have been going on for decades, especially in places like Southern California and Los Angeles, that have made housing more expensive, cost of living so expensive. And I imagine, I'm not really knowledgeable on the political landscape in London, but from what the little I know, it always seems a little worse than places like California and the United States in general.
So one of the quotes in here says that the act of owning and displaying art has been linked to showcasing social status and affluence, which challenges the perception that art is solely about aesthetic appreciation. It shouldn't be. And I've got plenty of proof in here that unfortunately sometimes it is, when someone walks in and says, do you have anything blue? I just bought a couch. And you know what, if that's what you're looking for, I can point you in a direction. It's probably not going to be here, but your aesthetic appreciation, what you want to see every day, we do this in a lot of ways. It's not just about what we hang on our walls. Aesthetic appreciation is our home from the outside. It's the car we drive, all of these things that we get to decide what we want to be surrounded with. And it's why I love what I do. But again, that collectivist approach to I'm creating something, therefore you should buy it from me. This whole thing it's not okay.
There's a quote from The Argument from the Virtue of Selfishness, where Rand says, she talks about modern art. She says, as an example of an entire field of activity based on nothing but the argument from intimidation, I give you modern art, where in order to prove that they do possess the special insight possessed only by the mystical elite, the populace are trying to surpass one another in loud explanations on the splendor of some bare but smudged piece of canvas. To your point, Linda, about some multi-million dollar smudge on a piece of canvas that is the highest of high art.
So very interesting that you say that, because many years ago, I was approached by an objectivist who worked for Microsoft. And I don't know who was picking out their artwork or what Bill Gates's personal taste is, but he said, can you help us? He said, when I go into work every day, the very first thing I see, he goes, now I kind of close my eyes or look down at my shoes when I walk into work. He goes, it's this big, ugly, dark, red, black, abstract painting that frankly looks like a woman being raped if you really, really look at it. He said, I don't want to see that every day. Can you break into the Microsoft world of art and help us out? So it took a lot of doing. It took a lot of phone calls. And what I found out was, surprisingly, the people who worked in the art department at Microsoft were actually related to the people who were making and paying all the bills. So they were, it was nepotistic at the very least. But yeah, that kind of stuff is out there. I mean, it's in airports, it's in shopping malls. I've gone to hotel rooms where I've tried to take art off the wall because it was disturbing. I couldn't sleep in that room. So, I mean, that stuff is out there, but you won't find it here.
Morgan, what do you think about This notion of we need to do more for, people of less means with more art. They can't afford it for some reason.
So for the last few days, being the downer that I am, I took a trip to London, and I not only got to see our great director, Razzie Ginsburg, I spent my time going around art galleries. And so I went around the V&A, which was magnificent, and the Tate Britain and the Leighton House, and cheered myself up because it was a wonderful time. And in terms of pricing, in terms of getting people of lesser means in, the notable thing was that I went to see an exhibit of the Rossettis at the moment that's going on in the Tate Britain, and the entry was £22, which is perhaps a fairly steep ticket price for an exhibit, maybe. But by signing up to a mailing list, it was cut to £5, like that. I just had to put my email in. There's lots of all these little things that galleries do. They really try and get you in if you can, try and find a way to cut the price. So I really don't buy this idea that it's just for the rich or the elite. There's so many ways they make it affordable. And also that Rand quote about modern art being for a kind of intellectual elite, or I suppose it's intellectual elite, I think is so true. If you ever go around, I guess what you say is classical art galleries like the Tate Britain or the V&A, they're packed full of people who are all clamoring to go and see what's in there. Last summer, I went to the Louvre, and actually I didn't have a very good time because there were so many people that it was actually hard to focus on the art. Everyone wanted to go in. People were fighting to get in. And then afterwards, we went to the Pompidou, which is Paris's modern art gallery. There was hardly anyone in there. And everyone who was in there, unfortunately, was in quiet reverence compared to the noisy, kind of bustly environment that was in the Louvre because it was so popular. So the idea that art is for a rich, cultivated elite is only really, I think, true of modern art, which is a load of rubbish anyway. So we shouldn't trouble ourselves with the idea any further.
Look at the Turner Prize winners. You want to see some art that people have thrown a lot of money at, and I just have to shake my head. I mean, who was it? I can't think of his name, that did the had the urinal and signed it, and someone declared that was art, and it was worth 7 figures. Yeah, I mean, if you need to pay that kind of money for that sort of thing, fine, but I don't understand it.
Is it, John, I want to ask you, I mean, as an artist and as an objectivist, is it interesting to you that kind of Rand's, I think, aesthetic understanding is one of the least known and seemingly popular elements of her philosophy? I mean, a lot of people seem to talk about aesthetics or epistemology, or excuse me, metaphysics or epistemology, but like, you don't, hear a lot of people who are really knowledgeable about Ayn Rand's understanding of aesthetics and art.
Yeah, it's true. It takes a backseat kind of to the rest of the epistemology and politics and stuff. But
so needed. I mean, like art, Rand describes as being so vitally needed to life. And so it's like, it's not a backseat. It's not, oh yeah, and throw some art on the walls and you're done.
No, it is a psychological need we have to both design our life, our experiences the way that we want them to be. And art is one of the ways we do that. So I think Ayn was completely correct on that. And it's put on a back seat, I think, because it's pretty abstract and people like to talk about politics more. But when you look at everything and all the people that came to objectivism, most of them came to objectivism through Ayn Rand's art. I mean, yeah, there's a few, but her stories, Atlas Shrugged, The Fountainhead, We the Living, they all do what they're supposed to do in art. And they brought us all to her ideas. And it's just a self-evident circle in that sense that art is important. And I think a lot of objectivists forget what brought them to objectivism was the experience. And art is about experience as an end in of itself, of joy for existence. And yeah, we do need to talk about it more, I think, because it would help a lot of the pessimism that's going on.
Thank you for a great contribution. Wants to know from Linda and John, what's your opinion on Jack Ventrino and the Portland Gallery? And maybe you can explain for those who don't know what that is. Why we should.
What's the name of the gallery? The
Portland Gallery and Jack Ventrino. Maybe you don't know?
I'm not familiar with either of them.
All right.
Off the top of my head, but
Apollo Zeus, we're going to get back to you on that then.
Yeah, I just tried to pull something up quick. I'm not familiar
All
either.
right, well, we're going to get back to that. We'll send around the horn one more time. I mean, on art and the importance of it. I certainly don't think any of us think that art is this in the realm of the only elite, the only super rich part of all of our lives. Kirk, you want to jump in last word on this topic?
I don't really think I have much more to add on this topic,
All
especially
right.
considering we have Linda and John Waz here, experts in this field. So I don't know if I have any more to add.
All right, well, should we move on to our final topic? Morgan, you good?
Yeah, sure.
Good. Well, and this again, out of Europe, we're switching gears now from the aesthetic to the political, going back to the issue in Russia, which always gets our super chat, the war in Russia, what I'm saying, the issue in Russia, it always gets our super chat reared up. The Fire Brigade Union said that there's been a refusal by the Trade Unions Congress to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This is the headline. The Fire Brigade Union said that they supported elements of the motion to condemn Russia, but claimed it was one of UK military intervention. They went on to say that we are proud of the history of internationalism, but we oppose the composite. The space for workers to debate this has been shut down. Remember that a bayonet is a weapon with a worker at both ends. This is the Fire Brigade Union. Another union representative, Mr. Newell, claimed that the far right exists in both Russia and Ukraine, and that imperialism exists on both sides of this conflict. So what do you make of this? I mean, this is actually coming from a so-called left-wing perspective. So why is it that everyone just can't agree? I don't know, maybe Morgan, will start with you if you want. Why can't everyone agree that it's wrong for one country like Russia to invade another like Ukraine?
It's strange, isn't it? For context, for people who aren't from the UK, the Trade Unions Congress is a kind of supra trade union that represents all the other trade unions because they love all this kind of bureaucracy, and they rear their head every now and again and say some very old-fashioned Marxist stuff, kind of like the rhetoric that you were reading out, Jonathan, about at both ends of a bayonet there's a worker and all this kind of stuff. And as I understand it, there was a motion put before them to condemn the invasion of Ukraine, and these guys said no, basically saying there's a moral equivalence between Ukraine and Russia. They're both imperialistic. They're both, and I guess the logic is kind of that they're both using the proletariat to their ends or something like that. I guess just when you have a worldview which is so distorted, like the kind of far right or like these very far left guys have, I guess ultimately the things that stare you straight in the face aren't what you're concerned with anymore. The notion that Russia is quite obviously the aggressor in this instance isn't what they're concerned with. They're concerned with some other ideological concerns about workers and the proletariat that they've got, and they end up saying these very bizarre things. And thankfully, I have to say, no one takes the Trade Unions Congress very seriously, so I think we'll be fine. But it's disappointing to see that we can't get more unanimity on the fact that this is a clear crime.
Well, I mean, Kirk, there's many on the right and maybe even on the left in the States who seem to admire Russia. I don't know, they admire their religion or their authority or their kind of nationalism. So, I mean, there's that kind of, it's not a slam dunk perspective on this side of the Atlantic either.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, reading about this story, like this trade unions Congress, I guess unions have a long history of being political, and I guess just the way things are today with how they're so involved with government and whatnot, maybe they feel the need to voice their opinions and views on issues not related to representing workers in a dispute or whatever. But from what I can tell, it's just at best, this is just an invasion trying to get out of moral judgment, moral condemnation. But more broadly, I mean, they're bringing the fact that the UK, this is like their military intervention. It's like, well, who started this? Like, it's not like the UK started this war. It was ultimately Putin and Russia. And I think from a lot of the discourse, from what I see, a lot of people just want to avoid that fact entirely and say, no, this is actually NATO's fault, that, they made Putin and Russia, fearful. They made all these promises decades ago, which are often blown out of proportion. And so I think it's just a way to maybe blame the good for being the good, or to equivocate it, conflate it with evil institutions like Vladimir Putin and Russia.
Linda, what do you think?
Just a blame game. Unfortunately, I didn't get a lot of time this morning to read up on it, but frankly, anytime I hear the word union, there's usually nothing good that follows behind it. So I'm in agreement both with Kirk and Morgan.
We hear a lot of like, well, Ukraine isn't exactly a shining, great, individualist paradise either, and that might not be true. But right, John, I mean, there's no question here that Russia was an aggressor and have killed not only thousands of their own people, but thousands of Ukrainians for no legitimate reason, certainly not in self-defense.
Yeah, every country is guilty of violating their citizens' individual rights, but that doesn't mean that every country is equally guilty or as heinous in it. And so, this idea of moral equivalency really leads down a road to just letting the worst actors get away with anything because no one's perfect. The US isn't perfect by any means. Does that mean we should just throw up our hands and not defend ourselves from truly bad actors that try and invade us? I mean, every country in the world has a draft. And, so, yeah, this line of thinking that everything is morally equal, I think just comes from the idea that even morality is kind of an evolution. We don't automatically know what's good for us as humans. We have to discover it. It's why slavery was once okay and now it's not. It's why kings and queens were once okay and now they're not so much. But it was a slow letting off of that. So I think the same thing with that they're doing with that. They just want the morality to be done and set. And if no one's perfect, then there is no morality. So anything goes then, I guess. I don't know.
And I understand too. I mean, politically here in the States, there's a sense of like, well, I don't want us financially to support this war. There's an argument there, but simply to be able to condemn the aggression. Rand wrote about this in The Virtue of Selfishness. She wrote, to abstain from condemning a torturer is to become an accessory to the torture and the murder of his victims. The moral principle to adopt is judge and prepare to be judged. And she certainly judged Russia quite harshly. And I think I do in this case tremendously. What a terrible culture and to have precipitated this war, to have continue this war, and why can't everyone at least get on the same side of that? I do not understand. Well, we'll thank all of you. Interesting topics today. We kind of covered the gamut, and more than anything, thank our subscribers. Robert Naser, thank you. Robert says, if no one's perfect, then moral condemnation is imperfect. And since, therefore, I'm imperfect, it's perfectly okay for me to morally condemn you. QED. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Bonnie, for your contribution. And Daniel says, on behalf of Diego, what about comedy as art? Whereas an individual is using his voice and expressions to show the world how he views reality. I don't know, does that count? You think this? A lot of discussions of, is this art, is that art? If you think comedy is art, John and Linda, we'll ask you.
I think there are limited cases where it possibly could be. I don't want to write it off completely, but generally I think it's more for entertainment than for art. But mostly because, comedy doesn't present a view of existence like art does, but I don't know. That's a difficult one. I've been asked that about video games too, and it's kind of like a similar. I think they could be, but they're not yet. I don't know. I'd have to think about that question more.
What do you think, Linda? And actually, that question in the super chat as well today. Someone said, "Well, what about video games? That's artistic, no, or that's art."
I think that the video games might lean more towards art than comedy does, being that there are renderings. There's an enormous amount of work that goes into creating the characters and the backgrounds and comedy. I love comedy, but I'm not going to call it art.
Well, I was going to do my favorite to get up the lyrics from Comedy Tonight from Zero Mostel, but I'm going to save that to another edition of the reality show. And thank all of you for joining us. We had a terrific discussion. Thanks for all the super chatters that joined us. And of course, we've got no upcoming shows today, but tomorrow we're back with 2 more great shows from the Daily Objective and the reality show and the Ayn Rand Center UK. We're only able to do it thanks to all of your support. So thank you for our supporters. Thank you for our listeners. Thanks for sharing the show. And unless Morgan, you have anything else you want to add?
Sorry, yeah, I wanted to give my 2 cents, because I think perhaps the questioner means stand-up comedy, in which I kind of agree. I don't think that's art, but there's a lot of literature which is comedic, which I think is artistic. One of my favorite writers is George Bernard Shaw, and Shaw is hilariously funny. And Shaw has a really deep philosophical belief which he's trying to dramatize, and is about the nature of reality. He's quite an irrational. He kind of believes reality is deeply contradictory at its root, and all these kind of conflicting forces are coming out. And he's got this whole kind of view, right, that's very peculiar and strange and kind of Nietzschean. But that means that in his art, he's dramatizing these kind of deeply silly, contradictory situations, which end up being very, very funny. Now, I don't think comedy has to align with that particular view, but that's a way that I think that you can have an artwork which is deeply comedic because of these kind of deep ideas that are trying to be dramatized in it. So I just wanted to throw that out there as a way that comedy could be considered art.
Yeah, I agree. It could definitely, Mark, yeah, it could definitely be a tool for art, no doubt.
There's somewhere, I wish I could remember it. I was going to try to start to Google it, but maybe we'll have it for another show, where Ayn Rand is asked about comedy, and I don't even want to try to, I think it's on the 1976 lectures by Dr. Peikoff and the after. So I'm going to not even try to get into it, but we'll bring it to you on another program, more of these discussions about aesthetics, about politics, about all that is this terrific philosophy that I know we all learn from and benefit from every day. So we'll wrap it up and see you tomorrow for another wonderful day with the Ayn Rand Center UK. From Kirk, from Morgan, from John and Linda, it's Jonathan Honig on behalf of Daniel and the team. Thanks for being part of what we do. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Best promises, and be well.
Take care.